layers. And in a monastic community today, you have the monastic community, and then you have auxiliaries or tertiaries. And a tertiary is one who's never actually been voted into the community, either because they didn't really want to be voted into the community, or because the community didn't want them voted in. But they lived the life sort of beside the community. But the community became a very intense group of this community. And their spirituality developed through the efforts of a close community, everyone dedicated to everyone's holiness. And so when I go into the community, what I am supposed to be about, first of all, is my holiness, and secondly, your holiness. And the whole community is organized that way. I'll give you an interesting thing. When I was in the Marist, I joined the Marist community for a while. One of the things we would do in the Marist community is there was a board, and you had to have your name on the board and another name, another member of the community you had to name. You picked the person. And anyone who had problems with me, who noticed difficulties with me or anything, would tell that person. And it was that person's job to speak to me. And that comes out of the Augustinian setup. And one of the interesting things about that, you certainly pick a friend, okay? You don't need an enemy doing this, okay? So you pick a friend in the community. But the advantage is that if a friend is speaking to you about difficulties, a friend is speaking to you for your benefit, not to condemn you or anything, and it helps you. That's one of the amazing ways of growth. St. Augustine actually tapped on the fact that I think one of the most transforming moments in anyone's life is when you first have an intense friendship. Whenever that occurs, it is the most powerfully transforming moment in your life. You find the ability to try all kinds of things, because if you make a fool of yourself, a friend will laugh at it with you rather than laugh at you. And you have all these different kinds of things that allow you to change, allow you to be different. And I think once that event takes place, you spend the rest of your life actually seeking those kinds of relationships. Because those relationships will allow you to go on growing, allow you to go on transforming. And St. Augustine basically built that into his what do you call it, community. I guess if I were to put a title, I would say that St. Augustine was essentially a scholarly pastor. St. Augustine and his community were very much dedicated to scholarship. Now understand, the friendship deal was what held the community together. But their outpour was basically scholarship. I don't know how many of you have ever seen the number of books published by Augustine. But if you were to go into, there's a set of books called Ming's Patrology. And Ming's Patrology is all the writings of the fathers of the church. St. Augustine was one of the fathers of the church. And you'll see shelves of books by Augustine. You don't have to be a genius to look at that and know that he had no word processor, no computer, no typewriter, no carbon paper, all these things. No human being lives long enough to do that with pen and paper. Those are really the products of his community. And in the community, St. Augustine would teach, and people would, and they would interact with the things they have, and they produced this as a community. The community really produced. So it was a scholarship, a community of scholars, a scholarship community. I'd like to give you just one example of how powerful this friendship thing was with Augustine. Augustine, one of the members of his community, was bishop in one of the cities he was in. And this community would on occasion move. But in this city where Augustine, where his friend was bishop, Augustine's friend died, the member of the community. And when the man died, 2 months later, the entire community had to move out of the town. And it's because St. Augustine could no longer function in the town. As he walked through the town, reminded of his friend, and brought about depression. So it tells you the intensity. You know, I think for this kind of spirituality to work, a person has to have a certain intensity that is not found in a lot of people. Okay? But this kind of intensity of friendship. His spirituality was a call to self-discovery, Whereas oftentimes, if you look back at the eremitical life, it's a call to alienation. You know, you try and get away from everything that might tempt you. Whereas St. Augustine said, you should discover what tempts you to avoid it. You should discover what builds you. But if what you're doing is alienating, you not only get away from what tempts you, you actually get away from what builds you. Okay? So he says it should be this kind of discovery. And he also understood it to be a call to serve the world. And again, the service of the church in the world was largely this scholarship. And it was a scholarship principally aimed at Scripture. Now remember, St. Augustine is later. I mentioned in the first people we talked about the eremitical life, the principal scriptures they worked from were the Jewish scriptures. Because the Christian scriptures, many of them were not even written when it started, and they were in the process of being written while they were there. This group, St. Augustine, his dates, incidentally, are 350 to 430. But in that period, the scriptures exist. So they were concentrated largely on the study of Scripture. I think one of the things to understand is that in the relationship that we have to Jesus, St. Augustine says it is primarily a relationship of healer. And it's a spiritual, not physical cures, a spiritual healer. And it is a relationship that we enter into Jesus, and it is a relationship of a healer. And Jesus seeks to heal us. He maintained that any basic friendship was actually a healing relationship. That most of us go into a friendship for the way it heals us. But in the process, we are the one who heals the other. That if you have a very close friendship, both people heal the other. It is a process of healing that goes on that way. And our relationship to Jesus with regards to heaven is Jesus is our friend at court. So like we enter into this friendship with Jesus, but he actually happens to be a friend of God. And so Jesus is our friend at court. He sees it in the friendship thing. One of the increments that seems to be required for this is that you are able to know Jesus, know who he is, before you know what he is. One of the great difficulties for all of us is we learn what Jesus is. Jesus is God. And once he's God, we sort of put him here. And it's not really likely that we enter into the kind of relationship of friendship. You know, friendship requires equals and creates equals. Like if you were a friendship with the most important person in the world, whoever it would be, you know, you will relate to that person as a friend. You won't relate to them by their office. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience in your life. A couple times in my life, I've met people of immense importance and not known it until later. And then I had a great relationship. If I'm introduced to someone and know he's the governor before I meet him, my chances of ever ending up a friend with him are nil. Okay? So one of the great things of Augustine is that Augustine learned all about Christianity before he believed. He learned all about Jesus and sort of entered this relationship to Jesus before he came into this thing of Christianity. And I think that's one of the difficulties with his spirituality for most people. Okay? He experienced the beauty, the power, and the consolation of life always in this thing of friendship, the experience of personal friendship. Now, the difficulty is the power and the intensity of Augustine's personal friendships is what made this community and what made this kind of spirituality. When St. Augustine died, this community ended. Okay? And it's because their intenseness of involvement with Augustine. The order that we know as the Augustinian order is the only order in the Catholic Church that was ever established by a pope. It was actually established by a pope many years later when he could take Augustine's rule. Augustine wrote a rule for his community, but he could take Augustine's rule and tweak it with Benedict. Once he tweaked it with Benedict, then it became a usable rule for a community, and the Augustinian order today actually flows from that. Okay? What did St. Augustine leave behind? St. Augustine left behind an ideal of a relationship with God. It is a relationship of intense friendship. Okay? When we go through each of these spiritualities. I'd like you to look at what makes it a spirituality and look at whether it's something that could work or would work for you. Now with this one, it has to do with the intensity of friendship. It requires a very, very intense friendship and also a person who is very intense in friendships. And it requires this ability to somehow look to Jesus as an equal. I personally believe that one of the very reasons for the incarnation was so that Jesus could approach me as an equal. That he would not approach me as God. Even though he is God, he would approach me as a human being. So that we could somehow enter this relationship and allow this kind of a spirituality to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So